Hey, Aaron, can you hear okay?
I can hear you just fine.
All right, sounds good. Well, we'll start pretty much on time. We'll wait a couple minutes. Hopefully, you're not my only attendee, but if so, the class owes you big time.
Hilarious. Yeah, this will be a good one.
Hi, Sean. Let us know if you can hear us okay. So
You're
far,
good.
it's a small crew. And now you all can just see the PowerPoint, right? Or do you see the presenter view? You see like a regular slide that just says exam number one
Yeah, just
review?
the PowerPoint.
Yeah, okay. That's what I'm going for. Well, if it's just you two, I probably should give you extra credit.
I was vouching for this early on.
I think the rest of the class should agree too, because if nobody showed up, I don't think I would have recorded just myself. So the Friday afternoon factor, I guess.
I'll take that extra credit.
Yeah,
All
I was
right.
sure I was gonna make it, so.
All righty. Well, it's 3 o'clock, so we're gonna go because I've got a lot of slides. So, and I will move fast through some of them, but basically I just went through the whole discussion and tried to pull in, and address pretty much everything I think I got. So, so I will go ahead and move quickly, but yes, definitely. Let's see who else. Oh, there's Allie. Okay. There's a few coming in. So Allie, Sean, Aaron. Oh, maybe we'll get some more now. Let's see. Hannah.
Extra and credit still included.
Well, if it stays a small crowd, yes, I'm noticing. I think that's fair that some people showed up and it's a major minority, it seems like so far. So let's see. Okay. All right, I'm gonna start and you may hear that little ding and I let more people in. So, but Hannah and Allie, we were just saying we might give an extra credit point to these few who showed up. I think Sonali's on too, because it's a very few and you're sort of representing for the whole class to make sure there's a review session. So that was good of you. So, all right, let me see here. Here we go. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay. Lindsay Johnson is on. Okay. So, a big, a thing that seems like there's a little, want to check in about, which is understandable because I agree this can be a little confusing too. How to tell an attitude from a belief, from knowledge, from economic cost benefit. And I would say this, is definitely something you could see on the exam. So an attitude, I really think the easiest way, keep it simple. Like if I'm going to ask you about an attitude, like these statements, if it's I like something, I dislike something, or this is bad, this is good, that's attitude. Belief is more tied to like confidence, trust. So it would be a little bit more like I trust the Forest Service, or I think prescribed fire is bad for or hurts the ecosystem. Maybe I won't use the word bad for confusion there, but and then knowledge is super straightforward. That is just like, is it a fact? Like this is information about the habitat or the animal, or this is the number of whatever that exists. And then economic cost and benefit is basically like it's gonna talk right in the statement about like a financial gain or loss. So those would be things to look for. That would be cues for that. So I have a lot of slides, so I'm just gonna go if that's cool. And if you all put a little hand up or something, does that sound like a good approach? Okay. All right. So the slides cutting one little thing off, but it's basically just a reminder. So somebody did ask about the case studies. That would be fair game. You wouldn't have to know about all of them, but you read one, so you should maybe be able to tell a little bit about one. And so here's kind of a reminder about what those are and some key points on that. So there was the Hawaii case study about strawberry guava. There was the wolf case study. There was the fire in Yellowstone. And then there was Zoe Shark and their successes in Fort Collins. So maybe just being able to talk about some of what that case study was about and how it connects to like how support and opposition can help or hinder what you're trying to accomplish. This came up a ton in the discussion. So the rational actor approach. So one important thing to note here, the rational actor approach generally does not work. Okay, so that's one important part. Here, I'm going to move this. So a couple people gave some good information in the thread to help with this, but I'll also just kind of give some reminders. So basically, the rational actor approach is what we see happen a lot in outreach and engagement. It assumes that people make rational decisions, that they're carefully analyzing information like economic costs and benefits and seeking out and considering new information. It involves providing detailed information or incentives, and that's going to work. And you all give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if that works well. Okay. Oh wait, Sean gave me a thumbs up. No, doesn't work. So so then we talk about some of these other factors, which we already had talked about some, the knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, some of these different things that shape and tell us that, that's going to impact this model, and that's going to make it maybe less likely that this rational approach is effective. So social science research finds that the rational actor model is often ineffective, and there's some of the reasons for that. People are affected by factors other than information and other than economics. So therefore, that stuff alone doesn't usually work. And then we also know that cognitive biases can come in. And so that influences the way we see things and receive information. So then again, we may not always learn what they are hoping that we learn. Okay. So refresher quick on cognitive biases. They are systematic patterns of deviation from the rational approach, basically from that rational objectivity. So that would be mental shortcuts, some of which we make for survival. And it's not that these mental shortcuts are always bad, because they can help us deal with information overload or if we need to act quickly, but they can also lead us to miss crucial information or to see something that isn't there, which that Dan Ariely TED Talk, this comes up with that. So that might be something to think about refreshing. And then we can make flawed decisions or remember things differently. So that is some of that information. So now something else that came up was the target audience and some questions about like, how do you narrow to a target audience and think about that. So a couple key points with target audience. And you know, this all you hopefully are noticing, this is all pulled from, you know, the slides in class. Like it is all in there. You just have to kind of comb through the PowerPoints a little. So this is target audience is like, okay, where do we want to focus our energy? So if we remember this image about the climate change continuum, there's Joel. So he's in, okay. So you want to remember aim for kind of the middle. So, you know, these would be the best, but you know, catching the edges of this is okay too. But you basically want to aim where you think you have the greatest impact and or are most likely to be able to accomplish some changes. And then of course you also want to drill that down into, you know, as focused a group as you can. So thinking about things about like, you know, is it a fairly homogeneous group? And like, you know, so it could be like age or gender or, you know, various things like that that you might use to focus in on. And so you might want to double check on some of those typical categories that you could use for target audience as well. Okay. So the planning framework, just a review of this, you know, we keep going back to like using this framework for outreach and behavior change. And so target audience is a key part of that. Conducting audience resource, the actually designing the key messages, piloting and implementing, and then evaluating results. So we'll dig into some other key components. Oh, I do have these terms up here quick, just because they come up a lot. Behavior, you know, just these are all in the very first week. But, you know, since we talk about behavior so much and talk about natural resource management outcomes, important to kind of remember what we're talking about. So behavior, any action that the public takes that may influence a natural resource management outcome. This can include personal behavior, like recycling or stewardship, civic behavior, protesting, etc. Natural resource management outcomes, we often think of these on the ground, ecological, or they can be social outcomes. And then there are some examples there. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that at this point. Okay, so when we are talking about the planning framework and that gathering audience research, conducting audience research, some people asked a question about surveys versus interviews and when you do what. So, oop, uh-oh, there we go. Oh dear, hold on, I'm stuck. So surveys, you want to think about when you already have some understanding of what matters to your audience, and you already know your audience somewhat. If you don't have that, then it's probably best to do those kind of exploratory, open-ended questions in an interview first, so you can kind of figure out what the range of perceptions is. And then we didn't talk about focus groups a whole lot, so I wouldn't worry about that right now, but that's another tactic that you can use. So surveys, some other things to just know is, I think it'd be good to know just very, very basically what an open-ended versus a closed-ended question is. And that closed-ended, a Likert scale would be an example. So here's like an example of a Likert scale. So a kind of a numbered question, and going from not at all to, yeah, I'm pretty likely to do this, or this is not a priority, this is a really important priority. And remembering that the point of that is then we can measure things that we think may or may not be true with our audience. And then you can also see if you're making progress and measure change over time. So something else that came up along in this conducting audience research, oops, somebody put something in the chat. So somebody said, do surveys just ask closed-ended questions? They could ask open-ended questions. They could. I mean, I would say surveys typically have more closed-ended questions because usually you're trying to be able to do, get a lot more information at once and maybe run some statistics and show some numbers. But absolutely, you can ask open-ended questions and then you just look at those in a different way, basically. So yeah. And I didn't see that right away, so don't be afraid to like wave or something. Okay, let's see here. So values, somebody asked like kind of how values are different than some of these other things. So values are really more personal. They're moral convictions that are deeply held, core constructs about what is good or bad, right and wrong. And what's different about values is they're going to be something you develop throughout your lifetime. So it's difficult for those to change. It doesn't mean they absolutely can't, but they move more slowly. And so this might be things like you can think of in your life, like maybe faith, your frame on justice, like family. Those may be less likely to move as quickly. And then we talk about these other buckets that also are kind of more deep value orientations. And so we had this chart that gave us some ideas of if you wanted to find out if people had these value types, there were some questions you could ask. So, that's an example again of, because you can see how these may be more, these are like more like worldview, like, kind of foundational things that impact how people see the world, really. So, and of course, we talk about biospheric a lot, strongly value preserving nature and protecting natural resources. Okay. So another area that there were lots of questions on was specifically the fake expert and the false balance. So of course, that was part of our discussion about misinformation, denial, and defensiveness, and then tactics that you can use to, counter that. And so those research-based outreach interventions for misinformation, denial, and defensiveness are educating people on fake experts and false balance, which I'm going to get to because there were questions on that. Asking people to first acknowledge the general contributions of science and providing opportunities for self-affirmation before sharing new information. And I think I end up breaking a couple of these down. So, fake experts, remember, is, basically people that are, the media portrays as knowing a lot about something, but they really don't have expertise in it. And this is more common to happen with, a politician or a celebrity, somebody that folks already resonate with. But it can even happen with somebody could be a doctor, but not a doctor of the thing that they're speaking about. So that's another way. And I imagine most of you I don't think people had as much trouble with this one. Although some people are just mixing up the fake and false. They're kind of getting the terms a little mixed up, like saying false experts and fake balance. So fake experts. The one that I think people have more trouble with is the false balance. So that is basically, and Sean gave a good little pie explanation of this kind of, but it's when you try to portray it as like two more even sides when it really isn't such, like when there's not as much science or research to back up the other half of this pie. So people asked too. So basically it's showing balance between 2 points of view when the science and information doesn't really back that up. And we know that this then can impact, basically it shows lower consensus and then people are less likely to accept. So climate change is the classic one that we talk about. And I would say don't stress too much. As long as you know what the two are. Some people are stressed about that they're hard to find. I'm not going to have you search the internet for a article during the exam or something. So you don't need to worry about that. And I totally acknowledge it is difficult to find false balance in one place. Like, so that's okay. But hopefully that activity we did in class helped you think about some strategies for how you could do that, which is basically, in some ways, looking at some different media outlets than you usually do. And then just kind of watching for it when you consume, news and other information, and it might pop out at you that way. And then somebody asked, could both be present? And the answer is yes. And if there's any background noise, I apologize. I do have a few other family members home. All right. Another one that came up was the elaboration likelihood model, which we didn't talk a lot about like that terminology, the elaboration likelihood model. But it basically tells us a little bit about this kind of different audience factors. And this is another question that came up is this idea of this high motivation and this low motivation. This is, we didn't talk about this a ton. I wouldn't stress about this a ton, but this is, I'm trying to even think what week this is. Let me see if I have a note about what week this is. I might not. So I'll see if I can, I don't know. Does anybody remember what week that is right now?
Week 3.
Is it week 3?
Yep.
Yes, and you're right, because I have a note on it. Yes, thank you. I think just looking at if there's high motivation, how the processing is different, and how the persuasion outcome might be different. But again, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this. Not something super high priority. I would say that to keep in mind that a difference is between the highly motivated and the less motivated. It might be good to just remember that you focus on more quality arguments if they're already highly motivated, whereas if they're not motivated and you need to get them there, this kind of makes sense. If you even think about yourself, you might need just a charismatic delivery and some super basic information, whereas somebody's already into something, then you can go a little deeper, get more complex, and tell them more. So okay, let's see. So week 4, the 5 research-based practices. So this is a pretty fundamental concept. Now somebody called it research based practices for designing. Framing is the way we used it in lecture, so that may have made it hard for some people to find when that person couched the question that way, but that is addressed in the discussion thread. But it's also here, the 5 research-based practices for framing messages to your target audience. This is, I would say, a super important thing to just have some grasp on these things. The make it personal through effective recall, stories, and metaphors. Emphasize the present and make impacts and solutions locally relevant. Frame messages to appeal to the values of your audience and consider the moral foundations. Pair fair appeals with efficacy appeals, or fear. Sorry, Freudian slip there. I like fair better than fear, I guess. Pair fear appeals with efficacy appeals and leverage additional cognitive biases. So we're gonna dig into a couple of these more because there were some questions. So psychological distance, somebody asked to review that. It refers to people's tendency to pay less attention to events that are happening far in the future or far away spatially. So we talked about this a little bit, like somebody may relate less to global or climate change on a global scale in some other country, but they might relate it to it more if you talk about how it's impacting Rocky Mountain National Park or Fort Collins. So the suggestion is then to emphasize the present in time and space, really, and then make any impacts and solutions locally relevant. And then of course that ties right back to this: emphasize the present and make impacts and solutions locally relevant. So that's in your 5. Okay. Fear appeal. So somebody asked about, so, I think it surprises people that fear works, but it can work. But remember, it pretty much only works if it's also paired with high efficacy. And I know I hit on it this week, but make sure you know what efficacy is, because efficacy is a pretty important concept to a lot of different disciplines. So the perceived ability to engage in an action effectively and make a difference through one's actions. I mean, and the way I like to think about it is just, can you do something about it? So you could look at writing an efficacy message. Your specific action can make a difference by whatever. Now is the time to act, make the most impact because blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Somebody asked specifically about cognitive consistency. And so that also ties in to this, ask people to first acknowledge the general contributions of science. So this is some of that misinformation and denial stuff, okay? So cognitive consistency is that people feel motivated to be consistent in their attitudes and actions. And so they wanna, they wanna basically, if they've done something a certain way for a long time, they wanna keep doing that. If their peers do it that way, they tend to wanna do what their peers are doing. And so this can make it hard, people resistant to different messages. But there also can be ways that you can leverage it. So in terms of counteracting it, you can demonstrate how skepticism, for example, of climate science doesn't align with people's personal faith in other science. So remember, you can acknowledge those other contributions of science. This is tying right to that. And that second bullet basically says the same thing. And then this is something, a nice thing about this is that even two very divided groups like conservatives and liberals do tend to share some general common beliefs in science. So you can work with that connection. And I know there was somebody who just kind of questioned, if some of this could really work. And so just thought I would share, there is a little, there is some information of where this was effective in some other studies. I'm not saying it's always, none of this is foolproof all the time, but there are tactics that can help. So there was a study there that kind of showcased that. Okay, drink. So this, somebody asked about the virality. I would say, yeah, one of the best things to do would be to watch that. If you want a refresher on it, watch the Jonah Berger video, which is super short, but social currency, does the message make you feel special or look good? Triggers, is the message associated with a common trigger? That was the Kit Kat and the coffee. Emotions. So this was a question somebody asked. They were confused about, well, how can emotions both facilitate and hinder? And so the ones that were helpful were awe, excitement, humor, awe, excitement, humor, anger, and anxiety were effective. And then there were some emotions that were not so much so. Sadness and contentment were not helpful. So these are the helpful ones that are up here. Public, is your engagement with the desired behavior message visible? So is it out there? And so the bracelets, I think the Armstrong bracelets is an example of that. Practical value, is the message useful? Stories, is a message shared through a story? And of course that aligns with some other things we've talked about in the class. All right, biases are of course fair game. And there was a specific question about status quo bias. So this also really came up in that Dan Ariely TED Talk. But status quo bias, people often avoid making difficult decisions and accept the default they are presented with rather than carefully considering new information about the decision. And so that's that kind of opt-in, idea. And so, how we kind of predispose things as a default is going to impact the outcome. Let's see here. So here's another example of status quo bias, where you can frame conservation issues as a continuation of existing or already accepted policies. So you could kind of build off of you've already participated in our conservation program by volunteering. Now continue your participation by donating some of your property as a conservation easement. So the idea that you're already kind of doing this and that's the status quo. So, can you push that a little bit further? Okay, and then scarcity heuristic got asked about, and I would agree, not something that we super highlighted or spent a lot of time on, but this is like an additional, some additional cognitive biases. And this was the idea that show how there is scarcity in time to achieve conservation targets and actions. So basically the idea that, you can kind of push this bias about scarcity, and then that might get people to act. Okay, 2 kinds of social norms, but first let's just refresh, even though we live social norms every day, what they basically are is perceptions of whether a behavior is commonly practiced and is socially approved of. And so there really are 2 big buckets, descriptive norms and injunctive norms. So descriptive norms are perceptions of how many others are engaging in the behavior, and injunctive norms is perceptions of what behaviors are approved or disapproved by others. And we'll talk about this a little more because there were quite a few questions on this. There were questions about, well, now wait a minute, how do you tell social norms from social diffusion? So again, social norms refer to perceptions of whether a behavior is commonly practiced and is socially approved of. Whereas social diffusion is one of our strategies where we can kind of spread the word and hopefully get something accomplished. So friends or colleagues have already adopted the action and have told others in their social networks about it. This process, which is referred to as social diffusion or diffusion of innovations, has been found to influence a broad array of actions. Let's see. And then somebody, I don't even remember who, but in the discussion brought up a great point that, obviously these 2 could connect. So like the rhino situation was an example of this sort of like, there was kind of this social norm to use to buy these rhino horns and that they would, provide all these benefits. But then through social diffusion, you can try to actually change that social norm, so they can impact each other, certainly. Let's see here. Trying to think. I think this is just my transition to the interventions. Okay, so in talking then about social norms, we talked about how you could use these norms then as basically an intervention to help you work towards your behavior change. So it would, so understanding the difference basically. So we already talked about what a descriptive norm is, but remembering that we would use this if we have the majority already doing the behavior. So that's like that's like when you use the descriptive norm. And so if it helps trigger your memory, the hotel example, the hotel towels, and we already had 75% of people doing that. So then you can use that and convince others too. If you don't have a majority doing it, then you don't want the descriptive norm. Then you want to think about either the dynamic or the injunctive norm. And so a little example of those is dynamic norm is like you have people changing, but they're not in the majority. So this kind of why some Americans are eating less meat, they're not the majority, but you do see change, versus this injunctive norm, which is you're not seeing the change you need. So that's not what you want to highlight. So then you go back to this kind of let's see. Yeah, the injunctive norm, sorry, which is like the petrified wood idea that you're telling them in order to preserve the natural state of the petrified forest, please don't remove the petrified wood. And so this is just kind of, since we aren't getting any of the change we need, we're just going to go back to the fundamental of remind people this is not a morally okay thing to do. This is not an acceptable practice. Okay, when to include financial incentives and disincentives was asked in the discussion thread. And so I think this list is a good go-to, to basically just know, okay, what are some of the reasons that you might include a financial incentive or like a penalty. So a financial incentive can be helpful if cost is the key barrier. It can help if asking them to stop the thing is something that impacts their livelihood. So like, ranching and wolves would be kind of an example of that. Or at least their perception is that it's greatly impacting their livelihood. Maybe we're still studying how much that, is true or not, but, and then can be used for the audience with very low motivation. So super low motivation, this is a time that this could work. And then of course, don't make this your go-to. All right, and then we're now to week 6. I don't know if I hop back to any other weeks or not, but this section is mostly week 6, the barriers and motivation. So that's probably a little bit fresher, because I guess we reviewed some of this super recently, maybe even some of this week. Barriers and motivations could be kind of grouped into these buckets. So it'd be good to just be comfortable with like, how would I label something as like a social or cultural versus like an institutional factor or some of the others. And you all, I'm not going to try to trick you. Okay. I'm not going to like word it so that it's like super confusing. Like I will try to use the words that we, used in class and tie to examples that we used in class. Because I understand that some of these can have some gray area and some connection. So I will work to make it pretty clear for you. So to give some examples, because I think that helps, if we talk about that little fire ant in Hawaii, so social and cultural would be, people paying attention to what their neighbors do, and that kind of connection to their peer group and social norms. Internal is our attitudes and beliefs and knowledge, that type of stuff. And we just had the example of people just love a hamburger, when we talked about the meat one. Economics, just, basically look for, are we talking about financial right there? And or like the fisherman example where that, it was impacting their livelihood. And then institutional. So this is an example of people don't have control across the boundaries, their property boundaries. We also talked about, you don't have control over what your grocery store has as an example, or you don't have control over how far away your grocery store is, or how far away the closest national park is, or things like that. Okay. Let's see. So somebody asked about, behavior change practices are a direct line of communication to third party change while research. So somebody asked about the difference between behavior change practices versus research-based practices. So we had those research-based practices to basically inform the process. And then we just more recently talked about these behavior change strategies. So these are just very specific strategies that you can use to try to promote behavior change. And so like we reviewed these with pictures, but just being able to kind of connect which of these goes with a practice or a picture, that would be something you'd want to be able to do. Is everybody pretty good on that one? Okay. Let's see. In week 5, we discussed one way to combat misinformation is to ask people to acknowledge the general contributions of science. I already talked about that, so I think we're good on that one. I talked about that earlier. Self-affirmation theory. Somebody also asked about this one. So the contributions of science, that was one way to counter the misinformation, denial, defensiveness. Another way is this self-affirmation approach. So what this says is that basically we strive to protect our own self-integrity. When that's threatened, we get defensive. And so then we don't, receive information the same. But defensive responses can be avoided if you are able to affirm self-integrity in other ways. So we'll dig into this a little bit more. Provide opportunities, examples of self-affirmation intervention. Ask people to report an important value. So basically, like, it's kind of, in some ways it's a distraction a little bit too, but it's also like, ask them to think about something else, like what's something they value, get them to talk about friends, family, a hobby, and then they're thinking about these other parts of themselves, that they're not just tied to whatever their current belief about climate change is, for example. And then you can also ask them to write an essay or do some kind of exercise or discussion about this other value. And I think I shared with you all, that's a tactic I definitely have used too. Like, so some of my survey is not a popular topic that, some people are going to have an aversion to my survey on engagement and inclusion, but I started off by asking, engagement is usually less controversial than inclusion. So I start that way and kind of ease in and talk about other things that they value, and then they might have some more buy-in to continue in the process. Okay, and folks asked about constructivist learning theory. So kind of oh dear, that's a painful slide. Uh-oh. Let me figure out what I did here. Hold on, team. I must have double pasted. I did. You don't want to double paste. Is that better? Okay. I was like ready for this just in the nick of time, you all. It's been a day. So 5 research-based practices for interpretation and environmental education. So this would be important from this week's content. And I think a lot of this is really straightforward and ties to constructivist learning. But yeah, if you are doing interp and environmental education, you want to provide interactive experiences with the environment and people. You want to apply multiple senses, activities, and delivery styles to engage. You want to connect with prior knowledge and experience. You also want to have clear themes that you focus toward, and you want to link conservation goals with everyday actions, which is what, showing up a little bit. Yeah, all right, Hannah was going there. All right, yeah. Okay, all right. Constructivist learning theory is different than this behaviorist model. And so it's the idea that the learner, constructivist is the idea that the learner is an active participant, so active in the construction of knowledge, and that knowledge comes from experience and reflection. So really fundamental parts of that are active learning, they're an active participant, and you're building off of prior knowledge and experience. And just a quick refresher on that interpretation and environmental education. Not something a lot of people know, but they are different things. And so interpretation is you're trying to influence the audience's knowledge, awareness, and satisfaction. People tend to be kind of more leisure-based and kind of just voluntarily showing up for this. Whereas environmental education is really a more structured process. You tend to have a captive audience of students that, have to be there. And, although I wouldn't say that's always the case, but definitely think student, definitely think process toward learning and developing actual skills and then also getting tools and understanding so that you can actually do something about it, address global challenges or environmental challenges. And I guess this might be our last one, and we'll see what other questions people have. Constructivist learning emphasizes, we basically already said this. So active and experiential, other tactics, inquiry-based, collaborative, and integrates with past experiences. And then, if you think about it, that ties directly to these kind of research-based practices that we suggest. So I think that is me. That's like, I went through the discussion thread, you all, and I think I hit everything that was in there. There was one person who had asked about biospheric altruism. I wouldn't worry about that. I don't even know if that was like maybe a typo or a blending, but you don't need to worry about those two things smushed together. Just maybe know what a value is and know that they're there are some kind of very different value systems like we show in that chart. Yeah. And I can stop here for a sec. Does anybody, I can even stop sharing for a sec so I can see you all. I was gonna look at one other thing, but you're all just quiet. Sorry, I spit a lot at you, but I knew we didn't want to be here forever. I don't want to be here forever either. Let me see here. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, I think we're good. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. I've blown you away. Well, you all are the last thing between me and the weekend, but if you have any more questions, I'm game.
I've just got a quick recap, Jamie.
Yeah.
For like my cheat sheet, I've got 5 steps of the planning framework, 5 research-based, 6 factors that influence virality, 4 categories, 8 strategies, types of social norms. So just like those lists of stuff. And then I've got a few definitions written down. Does that sound like a pretty good one? Because I don't want to like write my entire notes from class on one piece of paper. But do you think if I like review, I mean, this session covered pretty much everything, that should be good enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think this session was pretty comprehensive. And I'll be honest, like, I didn't like look at the exam to like dictate this session because I didn't think that made sense. Like, but I thought it made sense to look at what you all asked, and certainly this. But yeah, I mean, I think those lists, I think, being comfortable with some of the terms that we use or terms that I like have overemphasized a couple times in lecture. Those would be things to pay attention to. But yeah, Joel, I think, if you're somebody who's been going to class, keeping up with material, and you feel like your cheat sheet's pretty good, I trust it is. Everybody's different. I was the student who would cram every possible thing on my cheat sheet. It's just the student that I was, but I don't know if that helped me or not. Probably just helped me study. So I think whatever works for you.
Okay, thanks.
I have confidence those in the review session are my preppers, so representing here. So, and the rest of them will hopefully watch the recording. Is that it?
It's 5 bonus points, right?
Well, I'm not making any commitments, Sean, but I think it's fair. Like, how many is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, I should make sure it's recorded, but Lindsay, Allie, Sean, G, there's sometimes duplicates, Aaron, D, Hannah, H, Joel, and Sonali. Yeah, I mean, that's not too many folks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. To me, you 7 went above and beyond. I think I'm not going to go crazy, but I'll probably just put something right on your exam as a little bonus for taking it for the class and making sure there was a review session. Because if nobody showed up, I wasn't going to have one. So, all right.
It's appreciated.
Cool. Yeah. So, well, thank you all. So enjoy the weekend, and hopefully it helps. And I will probably stop the recording here and download it. All right. Be well. See you next week.
Have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.